our second traditional baking video with Tipple Park Museum. Today we are outside in one of our historic buildings before it gets a little too cold for us to do anything. So we are in the Mazeppa house today. This house was built in 1911. It's still standing, nice and sturdy. And today we're gonna look at a mulled wine recipe, or mulled cider. So I tried to look up some fun facts about mulled wine. There really wasn't any. The name comes from the same word meaning like to mill or like to grind grain. I'm assuming that has to do with the spices that get ground up and put in the drink. And as far as historians can tell, this practice of putting spices in a hot drink has been around almost as long as people have been cooking. So mulled wine, or cider, because I obviously have juice on the table today, not wine, goes by a lot of names, just obviously depending what country or what culture's recipe we're looking at. So you might have also heard it called glögg or glühwein, and it is a very, I guess, typical European holiday drink. If you're at a Christmas market in Europe, you can probably find a stand selling mulled wine. So we're gonna look at the ingredients that I have set out for mulled wine. I've got stuff that I would put in my own drink if I was making it at home. If you Google mulled wine or mulled cider, you're gonna get a million different takes on the recipe. So really, you can put in as much of any ingredient that you want. You can make it taste however you want. There's not really a way to go wrong with the recipe. So really, you start with your juice or your wine. If you're using wine, red wine is the most traditional. You could use white wine if you wanted to. If you want a non-alcoholic version, basically any juice that you want is gonna work. I've got cranberry juice out. You could make with apple juice, grape juice, currant juice. Really, like I said, the recipe's kind of up to you. And then when you're kind of selecting your spices, it's all up to preference again. So sitting out on the table, I have cinnamon sticks, I've got cloves, and I've got green cardamom pods. So you could also add ginger if you want it to be a little spicier, I guess, a little warmer for the winter season. If you like star anise, you can put that in there. Really, any of the spices that you would kind of typically think of as Christmas baking spices or pumpkin spice, that's gonna work in this recipe. And I like making mine in a crock pot, because if you were gonna use wine in this recipe and you wanted to do it on the stove, you do have to watch it carefully, because if you want it to remain an adult drink at the end of your cooking experience, you can't let the wine boil. But if you put it in a crock pot and just leave the crock pot on the lowest setting for a few hours, it's gonna work great, it's gonna taste good, and like I said, if you were using wine, it's still gonna be alcoholic at the end of its cooking time. So, you also put sugar in. Usually a recipe would tell you half a cup of sugar to a bottle of wine. I find that to be pretty sweet. I would put less in. If you like a really sweet drink, obviously half a cup is gonna work for you. If you want it even sweeter, do whatever you want. It's your recipe, your wine. So you take your beverage, put it in your crock pot, take your spices, and you can literally just throw them in the crock pot. As everything cooks, they're gonna get kind of waterlogged basically and sink to the bottom. If you, I don't know, are wary about your spices or think that you're going to end up scooping them into the drink afterwards, you could put them in a little like cheesecloth sack or a tea diffuser, and that way it kind of keeps them out of your way. You take your spices, whichever spices you want. You usually don't put much more than a tablespoon of each spice in, so I would probably put a couple of my cinnamon sticks in. Cloves aren't necessarily my favorite flavor, so I'll probably put half a tablespoon in, but I really like the flavor of cardamom, so I would probably overdo the cardamom in mine. And just, I guess, a word of advice, if you're using cardamom pods, and I have whole ones, I would remove the spice from the pod, because the pod can give a bitter taste into whatever you're cooking. So if you've got like a mortar and pestle, you can sort of gently smash them that way. You can literally just peel the green part off, and the little brown bits inside are the spice that you want. And I would put at least a tablespoon of the actual spice from the cardamom into my drink. And then there's a few kind of optional ingredients you can put into your mulled wine or mulled cider. It's very typical to see orange slices or just orange peel put into the pot as it's cooking to give it the citrus flavor. And especially in Scandinavian recipes, probably closer to the end of when you're cooking, you can put in a mix of almond slices and raisins. Which sounds kind of weird, but it's really good. The raisins and the almonds sort of soak up the flavors of the cider. They soak up the spices, soak up the liquid, and you just sort of eat them out of your cup when you're when you're enjoying your cider. So once you've got everything in, just let it cook on low for, I'd say, a minimum of 2 hours. And once it's done, you should have really nice, spicy mulled wine or mulled cider, perfect for the cold, wintry Christmas season that we're in right now.